MS Now spoke exclusively with the wife of the sailor who actually jumped off the ship last week. She says he was in the water for about an hour before he was rescued and then medically evacuated off the ship. The wife said she was not contacted by Navy officials about the incident until 4 days after it happened. She learned about what she described as a suicide attempt after one of her husband's friends on the ship messaged her that someone from his squadron went overboard, she said. Later, that friend told her it was indeed her husband, according to messages reviewed by MS Now. Now, the wife said she had not been able to stay in regular communication with her husband, who is a 19-year-old aircraft mechanic on his first deployment, because the internet signal on the ship was unstable and inconsistent. She said when they did talk, he expressed that he was homesick and exhausted. She shared the last text exchanges she had with her husband on July 21st, and in them he writes, "I think the boat is finally getting to me." He went on to write, "I'm really trying to not feel negative or hopeless, but between the Wi-Fi and not knowing when I will come home and not knowing what is happening back at home, it's really getting to me. I don't think I can do another deployment after this, and I don't even know if I can finish this deployment." Here is some context about the strain on the service members. The Lincoln left its home port of San Diego on November 21st. The ship has only stopped twice, once in Guam in December and on July 7th when it briefly pulled into Oman, keeping the crew at sea for more than 200 continuous days. The Wall Street Journal has new reporting. The U.S. military is preparing to replace the U.S. Abraham Lincoln with the USS George Washington, which has been operating in the South China Sea, but officials at this paper spoke to did not give any timeline for when that could happen.
I mean, the promises have been made. The promises have been broken twice now. I mean, think about this, Mika. It's been 9 months. It's been 9 months since the Lincoln pulled out of San Diego on what was supposed to be a routine 7-month cruise. And here they still sit. 5,000 sailors and Marines. Hundreds of days at sea. And that's a record broken that I guarantee you from my years on the Armed Services Committee, I can tell you that breaks the morale of American servicemen and women. And in doing that, it dangerously undermines the armed forces of the United States military. Two times Pete Hegseth's Pentagon promised them, "You're almost home." And twice, Hegseth's promise was broken. Now, again, the thing I learned on the Armed Services Committee is readiness isn't limited to weapon systems. It's sailors and Marines that are forced to sleep under moldy conditions. Marines and sailors forced to drink contaminated water, to continue working with no days off, to be separated from their children, their spouses, their parents, and their loved ones longer than any military leader would ever willingly permit. We've seen it. I mean, Pete Hegseth's cartoonish celebration of war, his advocacy of these endless wars, these constant invasions, his continued failure to plan ahead, whether it's on munitions or whether it's on deployments. It's left the U.S. Navy with too few carriers to send in relief, while the most exhausted ship continues its endless mission in this avoidable war. And while Pete Hegseth dithers, morale bleeds American readiness. American readiness will bleed into the next conflict, into the next crisis, into the next war that Pete Hegseth begs for. Meanwhile, the Lincoln's battered and exhausted crew, they continue standing watch, and they're doing their job, and they're doing the job that was asked of them. Even if the Secretary of Defense that they ultimately answer to is simply not.
Let's bring in the co-host of our 8 a.m. hour, staff writer at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, opinion writer at The New York Times, Mara Gay, CEO and co-founder of Axios, Jim Vandehei, and managing editor at The Bulwark, Sam Stein.
John Lemire, how long is Donald Trump going to allow this guy to remain Secretary of Defense? You look at the munitions crisis, they lie about it. He yells at people in the press when they tell the truth. He thinks he can scream and yell and lie and bluster. He's kicked out any real reporters from the Pentagon, but he can't run from the truth. This guy doesn't know how to do deployments. He doesn't know how to manage munitions. He doesn't know how to have his military, the greatest military on the face of the earth, fight a war that he begged the president to get into. John, how much longer is the president going to dither and allow this guy to make him look weak and ineffective?
Pete Hegseth only has a handful of defenders in the White House, but he still has President Trump. To your question, Joe, we know and have reported that in the last couple of weeks, Trump's frustration with Hegseth has grown. White House officials continue to insist that Hegseth's job is safe, but we know how it works with this president. You're safe until you're not. And as these unending bad headlines add up about the state of the war, and in particular the military's preparedness and the state of that aircraft carrier, one has to wonder how much longer Trump's patience will last. And we should note the munitions crisis we've discussed at length this week about the defense, these interceptors. They're down significantly. That right now, U.S. does not believe we have the ability to adequately defend our bases and allies in the region. I mean, and don't even mention like Asia, were there to be an incident there. Also, Washington Post reporting the U.S. military has lost roughly 25% of its Reaper drones. So that's another piece of the arsenal that's been depleted because of this war. And Joe and Mika, just yesterday, Secretary Hegseth, we're talking about this aircraft carrier having record long deployment. Just yesterday, he was asked about how long this naval blockade might go on. And he says, we can hold it as long as we need to. And then he used the word indefinitely, suggesting that this naval blockade and therefore assets of the U.S. Navy could be in that region indefinitely. So the very sort of forever war that President Trump repeatedly campaigned against over the last decade, his Secretary of Defense right now floating that idea that there could be a forever war in the Middle East now.
And as Jonathan just mentioned, there's new reporting this morning on the depletion of United States weapons stockpiles amid the Iran war. The Washington Post cites 3 officials familiar with the matter who say the U.S. military has lost roughly 25% of its Reaper drones. The aircraft, which are used to conduct surveillance and targeted strikes, have seen heavy use around the Strait of Hormuz, but are seen as easy targets for Iran's military and its regional proxies. The Reaper can cost between $30 and $50 million, with the potential taxpayer cost of recent losses coming in at $1.3 billion for that weapon system alone. The aircraft is just one in a long list of U.S. weapons and munitions drained by this war. Meanwhile, the Trump administration continues to emphasize economic pressure on Iran. Here's what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Newsmax last night.
Watch this space for more announcements coming next week, because we are going to apply measures like have never been seen in the history of economic isolation on a country. It will be a combination of economic isolation like the world has never seen before, and the continued blockade in the Strait of Hormuz that will keep anything from going in or out of the Iranian ports.
So glad he was all right after being put on the decoy plane.
Yeah. Didn't make the cut for the bakery truck.
No, he didn't. So anyway, Jim Vandehei, going back to the Armed Services Committee and what we always obsessed over all the time, Democrats and Republicans alike on the Armed Services Committee when I was there, the American military's ability to fight a two-front war. We always felt we had to have enough munitions. We had to have enough weapons. We had to have enough carrier groups. We had to be prepared to fight a two-front war. The United States has been fighting this one front war. Mainly, we're the side that's shooting without them shooting back that much. And we're talking about Iran, not China, not Russia. We're talking about Iran. And yet, we didn't even plan for this. We're running out of munitions. We've got troops on rotations that are going to crush morale, that's going to crush readiness, that's going to bleed into the next conflict. What's going on here?
Yeah, again, we've talked about this for a month. This was all foreseen and foreseeable. The president was warned by all of his advisors that all the scenarios we keep talking about on this show could and would likely happen, that the Iranian regime wouldn't just buckle, that it would fight back, that they're not motivated by worrying about economic sanctions. Their economy has already collapsed. So then when you go into this war and you send these wobbly signals about whether it's working or not working, imagine being the Secretary of Navy trying to figure out, okay, when do I have to rotate deployments? Imagine being the commander of that ship. One day it seems like it's done. The next day it seems like we'll be there forever. Then the obvious outgrowth of that is what you talked about at the top of the show. My dad loves a saying, prior planning prevents piss poor products. Same thing with performance. And you're seeing it because there isn't a plan. There's no direction to give these. And he likes Hegseth. Yes, there's a lot of people around him who don't like the defense secretary. He likes him because he does not push back, because he defends everything that the president does, that he says it's always part of the plan, that he'll go after the press, that he'll purge people that don't look like him outside of the military, regardless of what their qualifications are. He's doing what he was asked to do.